So I know you've been involved in a knowledge sharing project. Could you tell us a bit about the context and tell us a bit about the project as an example of a case study of using a sort of the socio-technical systems thinking, the Hexagon, to get your head around an organizational problem?
Yeah, sure. So I've been involved in a project where the aim has been to try and improve knowledge sharing across an organisation. So there's this idea that on a strategic level, it makes a lot of sense to share. I'm calling it knowledge, but it's kind of advice. So to share information, knowledge, advice with other people within the organisation. The idea is that actually, although people generally have individual performance metrics and individual roles within the team, they are, to at least a certain extent, interdependent on other people. So they can't necessarily do their job without seeking advice from somebody else and sharing advice with somebody else. Or that in other cases, actually, somebody else might do their job better if they just knew what that other person was doing. So there's been this idea within this organisation that at a strategic level, it makes a lot of sense to share information and knowledge. But what is increasingly apparent is that actually knowledge is power, and people don't want to share that necessarily, or actually can't share it. They don't know what they know, which is quite a difficult situation for somebody to be in. And an even more complex related concept is the idea that people don't know what somebody else knows, so they don't know they need to know it.
Yes.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
So you have people sitting in an organisation who actually have an awful lot of experience, knowledge, but usually that's tacit. They don't know that they have it, and or they have it and they think, I don't think I really want to share that with somebody else because that might make me dispensable. Mm-hmm. So actually, what we figured is this is a classic socio-technical issue. So there are issues around the technology. So actually, can we share this? If I'm sitting in an office in the UK and I need to share some information or knowledge with somebody in the United States, mm-hmm. Is there actually a technological platform that we can share this through? So is there a facility or a platform? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no. So that might be, is there, are we physically on the same time zone? Mm-hmm. Are we going to physically cross paths in the same working day? It could be, is there a platform that can capture this knowledge? Yes. So actually, does it have is there a way of putting this knowledge into a database?
And not only that, then also, is there a simple, trustworthy means to retrieve this knowledge?
Yeah. So can the knowledge be shared? Can it be retrieved? And also, do people know what they're seeking for? So if you put information into a system, do people actually know how to retrieve it? Do they know what search to put in? And is the system capable of that? So there are some really classic technological issues, and that's one part of this problem, if you like. But actually, there's a much broader context to this. So can people physically share? But then there's a whole set of social issues around why they might share and why they might not want to even attempt this process. So, for instance, I was saying before that there are instances where it's actually, there is no goal for somebody to need to share this. There is no metric or incentive for somebody to share advice or knowledge with somebody else. So if I know that I can still meet my performance objectives, I can still deliver the product that I'm being asked to deliver, and I can still do my part of the process, yes. Without sharing information or knowledge with anybody else, mm-hmm. and without having to learn how to use a new system and take time out of my day and maybe stay late so that I can deal with this time difference. If I know that I can actually do my job without any of that hassle, then I might not be willing to share information.
Absolutely. So you've touched on you'll have to learn a new process,
yeah.
Or the process isn't clear. You might be writing the process.
Yeah.
Then there's the idea of training yourself, or the risk of training others, your peers.
Yeah.
And then
there's the
all
goals.
of that tied to, is any of this incentivized? Is any of it aligned with what, in the eyes of your leaders, what success looks like? Yeah.
And then there's also some really interesting stuff about that I found more recently about the infrastructure and the workspace and the layout. So, for instance, we know that there are different types of advice that people might start to seek and share. And one of the things that I've been interested in looking at is the role that the physical space people operate in has. So people say typically that they like, if they're going to build up a trust with somebody else, they usually like to have met them at least once, which is quite interesting. They usually say, yeah, so it's not necessary that we always have face-to-face contact, but I like to have met them and, you know, maybe socialise with them at least once, just to know that there's a connection there, and that helps build the trust. People talk about how they're if they're sat next to somebody and it's just a sort of it's not a sort of type of advice that really relies on expertise. It's just a kind of, you know, do you know how to do this? Do you know how to do that? They'll typically go to the person who's closest to them in proximity. So if you're sat around an open plan office, you might not want to put your the person that you think is most overloaded bang in the centre of the office, because they're likely to get even more overloaded with questions and problems.
It's sort of the dark side of the trust relationship.
Yeah. So
there's a relationship between knowledge sharing and trust, but if the infrastructure puts the most trusted person in the middle of the space, then they'll have no control over their environment.
Yes, and they become really overloaded.
Yes.
There are other types of advice, though, interestingly, that people say, do you know what, it doesn't matter where in the world you put this person, I am completely dependent on them to do my work, so I will always find a way to contact them.
Right.
But that's usually going back to this idea that there is types of advice that what was I going to say? There are some types of advice that anybody can answer, and there are some types of advice that mean that you are actually dependent on a particular named other. And in those situations, people do tend to share, but it's going back to that idea that they know what they need to know.
The process is clear.
And the process is clear.